failure by governments and the construction industry. Natasha Elcock is from Grenfell United, which represents some of the families involved.
Every single loss of life that night was avoidable. Human life was never a priority, and we lost friends, neighbours and loved ones in the most horrific way through greed, corruption, incompetence and negligence.
The Prime Minister's apologised on behalf of the state and told the Commons there must be full accountability. 4 people have been killed and at least 9 others injured in a shooting at a high school in the US state of Georgia. A suspect has been arrested at the high school in Barrow County. Dame Priti Patel's become the first candidate to be knocked out of the Tory leadership race. After the first round of voting, she racked up just 14 votes. And climate activist Greta Thunberg's been arrested at a Gaza war protest in Denmark. 6 people have been detained for suspected trespassing at the demonstration against the University of Copenhagen cooperating with Israeli universities. In the city, the FTSE 100's closed down 25 points at 82.73. The pound buys $1.31 and €1.18. LBC weather: showers for southern areas tonight. Some may be heavy and a low of 5 degrees. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Daryl Jackson.
LBC This Morning on Nick Ferrari at Breakfast.
Sir John Sawyers, who's former head of the MI6.
There's a lot of questioning as to whether Israel is pursuing the right response. They're trying to destroy Hamas, but what they've done is destroyed Gaza, and Gaza is going to be an extraordinarily difficult place to live now. And there are question marks about whether Israel is allowing humanitarian aid to get through to the Palestinians.
We can't make more land. Someone's got to give up land.
Well, that's true, but it's recognised that the West Bank and Gaza Strip are essentially Palestinian. The outlines of a two-state solution has been there for the last 40 or 50 years. I think we'll see terrorist groups like Hamas continue to exist, continue to operate, and continue to attract support from around the Muslim world.
Nick Ferrari at Breakfast. Back tomorrow morning from 7. Listen on your radio and on Global Player, LBC. This is LBC. From Global, leading Britain's conversation. This is Cross Question.
And it's Simon Marks sitting in again for Ian Dale, and once again helming Cross Question. If you are new to LBC, every Monday, Tuesday and Wednesday night at 8 we invite a panel of prominent figures to join us here in our Westminster studio, and we give you open access to them. Any question goes on any topic that for you is top of mind. And here tonight alongside me, Dame Siobhain McDonagh, the Labour MP for Mitcham and Morden, Sir Ashley Fox, the Conservative MP for Bridgwater, who led the Conservatives in the European Parliament for 5 years, Piers Linney, the entrepreneur and investor who starred on TV's Dragon's Den, and Dr. Charlotte Proudman, a human rights barrister and the founder of Right to Equality, an organisation seeking to remove sexist inequalities from the law. As I say, you can ask them anything you like, though we suspect some of you may have more questions about today's Grenfell report, or perhaps about where things are going in the Tory leadership contest after Robert Jenrick topped the first vote today and Priti Patel was knocked out. Maybe you're still irked over the price of your Oasis tickets. The Prime Minister said today he's going to do something about that, eventually. Or perhaps you're still mulling the government's decision to suspend some arms shipments to Israel. Whatever question you've got, we are waiting for it here on Cross Question. And remember that while you are more than welcome to listen to us on the radio, you can also watch us in vision, in glorious high definition right now on Global Player.
Call 0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. Cross Question. Watch on Global Player. This is LBC.
And welcome to the programme. As I say, any question that you want to ask, we are willing to offer you the opportunity to ask it. The phone number to call is 0345 6060 973. You can text your questions to 84850, or you can say to Alexa, send a message to LBC, and you can formulate that message as an opportunity to send us a question for the panel this evening. So So all sorts of issues that you can ask us about. As I was saying, maybe you've got a question about the Grenfell fire. Maybe you've got a question about the situation regarding the government's decision to terminate at least some weapons shipments to Israel. Whatever is on your mind this evening, we would like to hear from you. I'm going to start by asking members of the panel a question of my own, which is for their reaction today to this report into the Grenfell inquiry. It is an absolutely damning indictment of modern Britain in many ways. And Dame Siobhain McDonagh, I'm wondering how much confidence you have that the Prime Minister, who today said the Grenfell families are not going to be betrayed again as they have been consistently over the last 7 years. How much confidence have you got that that's actually going to lead to concrete action?
Having seen his statement in the House, I have every confidence in his integrity and his belief that he will do that. I wish I could say that I was shocked by the report. The biggest issue that people come to see me about is housing. And we are currently placing hundreds of thousands of people, over 100,000 children, in temporary accommodation. And these things will keep happening unless we get a credible, proper housing policy which respects social housing as part of our housing supply.
So, Ashley Fox, this report was a damning indictment, was it not, of consecutive Conservative governments. I mean, the focus on the culture of deregulation that it identifies and points the finger clearly at some named former top officials within Conservative governments. It's potentially a massive problem for your party, isn't it?
It's also a shocking indictment of companies that lied, unfortunately, and that is shameful. And I hope that the government will hold those companies to account. The government has taken action. The previous government did take action following the fire. We passed the Fire Safety Act. We've passed the building safety regulations. 98% of those buildings, most at risk, action has been taken. So progress has been made, but I accept not enough.
But how worried are you that there is the possibility now of criminal prosecution that perhaps could include a focus on some former senior figures within the government?
Well, that'll be a matter for the CPS. And if charges are justified, then they should be brought.
OK, Charlotte Proudman, you're a human rights barrister. You're obviously dealing with the legal profession, not necessarily specifically, not in any sense specifically regarding Grenfell. But I'm wondering your view on the timing of all of this. You've got the Metropolitan Police today saying that it's going to be 2026 before their investigations are complete, 2027 before cases come to court. That's a decade for these Grenfell families to be awaiting any semblance of justice.
No, it absolutely is. And as you say, it is an indictment. And these families are crying out for justice, understandably, given the horrors and tragedy and trauma that they have suffered. We know that there are over 100 Metropolitan police officers investigating the Grenfell Towers tragedy. And yet at the same time, it's hard to fathom the fact that, as you say, it's going to be about a decade before this case potentially results in charges. I doubt very much there'd be a trial even in 2027. You're potentially looking at 2028, even 2029. For far too many people, that is justice too late. And in my view, it needs to be expedited. And if that requires more resources being fed into the Metropolitan Police Service and the Crown Prosecution Service, then so be it.
We looked at this in the last hour, this notion of doing the public inquiry first, delaying the criminal investigation until afterwards. Joshua Rosenberg, legal commentator, was making the point that's not what happened in the Lucy Letby case. It is what has happened in other cases. It does inevitably mean that the wheels of justice grind very slowly.
Yes, no, absolutely. I thought Joshua Rosenberg explained that extremely clearly. Of course, you say he's a legal commentator, and, you know, in cases, sometimes you'd have the inquiry first, sometimes you'd have the trial first. But I think in this case, as you say, it's resulted in the trial now, unfortunately, being significantly delayed. And I would have thought that one of the recommendations perhaps should have been that there is an expedited justice process through the criminal justice system so that people can see justice within less than a decade.
And Piers Linney, if this is an excoriation of the British government's, successive British government's duty to protect public safety, it's also a terrible excoriation of the private sector.
Yeah, this makes me extremely angry, and I think what you have to do is go back and look at that entire supply chain in terms of where were decisions made. I think they were saying that a lot of this was down to just dishonesty. There were cladding that was supposed to be fireproof, and actually it was quite the opposite. So they're basically trying to make a fast buck and putting people's lives at risk. So they need to go back and look at the whole supply chain. When were decisions made? Who made them? And if ever society owes a community justice, this is it, and it should be seen to be done. And it shouldn't take as long as they're talking about either. We need to see this happen, and people should, and it's not just companies either. I know you want to prosecute the company. I'm actually a lawyer by trade, so I'll probably get found out now. But it's actually, are there individuals that are culpable?
But with your legal training, you're seeing this from both ends of the prism in many ways, both ends of the spectrum. You would say that the Metropolitan Police absolutely should be considering criminal prosecution of some of these companies that are involved, even though, as we were talking about in the last hour, some of them are not based in the UK. You've got companies in France, you've got a company in the United States, companies in other jurisdictions. Bringing those corporates to justice is going to be very complicated.
So you got this concept, the social contract, right? This is where you expect the government, the regulators and corporates to do things and work within the law, and they clearly haven't. So no matter where they are, whatever our law is capable of doing, they should be brought to justice.
All right, we have a question that has come in on text from Simon, who says, and this is changing the topic, how can anyone talk about limiting immigration without also talking about reforming immigration to include quotas as part of the visa process? Siobhain McDonagh.
I think that's particularly telling given the 12 people who lost their lives in the Channel today, including a mum and several children. I think we have to have safe routes and we have to look at that. I think we've got to obviously tackle the gangs that are peddling this murder, and we've got to have a functioning immigration system where people whose cases do fail are returned swiftly and properly.
Ashley Fox?
Well, I agree we need to have limits on immigration, and that's why we have a points-based visa scheme. And I think the difficulty is that over the last couple of years, the Conservatives, set those points too low. Too late, we raised the number of points you need to get a work visa. That will halve immigration this year to about 300,000, but that is still too high. If you allow 300,000 people to come in a year, but you're not capable of even building 200,000 homes a year as a country, it isn't a surprise that eventually you have a housing crisis. So we do need immigration, but we need to limit it so that our country can accommodate that. Now, the issue of illegal immigration is different. And the problem there is the Labour Party don't have a scheme for deporting those people who arrive illegally who can't be returned to their countries of origin.
Yes, we do.
So how do you return somebody, for example, to Iran who enters the country illegally? How do you deport them?
Since we got elected, which was only 8 weeks ago, we have deported more people than you have in about 5 years. We've had the biggest chartered flight of returning people to Brazil. We're getting the system working.
But Brazil's a safe country. You haven't answered the point as to how you would return people to unsafe countries like Iran or Afghanistan.
Surely, if somebody was coming here from Iran because of their concern about the government, the political structure, they would be people who were granted asylum.
But if they weren't granted asylum, how would you return them?
Well, I'm not sure we certainly wouldn't want to return a woman to Iran, would you?
Charlotte Proudman, you're aching to get in.
I've practiced immigration law, and I can say quite confidently the Home Office is in total disarray, and perhaps the worst Home Office I've seen has been under your government, under the Conservatives, and I'm certainly a lot more hopeful under the Labour government. But if someone comes to this country and they have a well-founded fear of persecution, as you say, Siobhain, for example, a woman who may be fleeing Iran based on gender-based persecution, then their claim would be made out and they wouldn't be returned. If they can't be returned because that country is not safe, then their asylum claim would be made out. And I think one of the issues, including the question raised by your caller and also by some of the comments from the panel, is the lack of perhaps empathy and compassion for those people that are crossing the Channel who are desperate to seek refuge, safe refuge. They wouldn't be travelling across choppy waters, often by people traffickers, in an overcrowded boat, a boat that in this instance collapsed, resulting in a pregnant woman dying and children. That is desperate to get here so that they can reach a place of safety. And instead of the government, and we have a duty under the Refugee Convention to make sure that they do have a safe haven, instead we demonise them, including in the media. Our government shows a lack of compassion for them, in some instances turned away when they shouldn't be, even waiting 10 years for their claim to be heard. That, in my view, is contrary to key principles under the Human Rights Act, and we are failing those individuals, particularly children who are here for their entire minority with insecure immigration status, only to become adults and are then turned away, even if they've been here 10, 15 years. It's absolutely appalling. And then you look at women who come to this country who've suffered female genital mutilation, those that have been forced into marriage, suffered honour-based violence and are turned away by the Home Office and then are wrapped up in legal proceedings, not entitled to legal aid, some working on the black market, earning less than £2.50 per hour. That is modern slavery, and it's happening under the noses of our politicians, and nothing has been done about it.
Let me get Piers Linney in. Your view.
Well, I think it continues to be this mixing up on this sort of immigration and asylum seekers, and people don't understand. I think you're absolutely right, Charlotte, that and people say this to me all the time, well, they shouldn't come over on these boats. You're like, they know the risk. It's not as if they realise, oh, I've got to cross the channel in a boat now. They know that before they get there. They would not be taking these risks if it wasn't a very good reason. And I agree with you, Sean, that there is a process. We need to make sure it's efficient and that people go through the process as quickly as possible. And then when you go through the process, then the decisions to be made and the processes, they exist. This stuff is, it's been there for many, many years. We're just lost the way in terms of making sure that people are treated with respect.
But don't you accept that people in France are not fleeing persecution?
Well, they just came through France.
No, but they're in France. So there's no need to cross the channel to claim asylum. They can claim asylum in France.
Yeah, but
so the decision to get in a boat is a decision of choice. It's a decision to, I don't want to claim in France, I'd prefer to claim in the United Kingdom.
I think it's dangerous putting yourself in their shoes, sitting in a nice studio with a nice cup of tea, and putting yourself in someone's shoes that has made a decision for whatever reason that I want to go to the UK, and saying they should stop in Calais because we think it's easy for us, it's expedient. I think it's very difficult to put ourselves in their shoes and understand why they're doing it. The point is they're doing it, and we need to deal with it in a humane way.
Okay, we're going to take more of your calls in a moment. You can get in on this conversation at 0345 6060 973. You can send WhatsApp questions to that number as well. You can text us at 84850, or you can ask Alexa to send a message to LBC. It's Cross Question on LBC, where the time is 18 minutes past 8.
This is LBC. Cross Question on LBC. Text 84850.
And to our first caller of the night to the panel, and it is Lorna calling in from Norwich in Norfolk. Good evening, Lorna.
Good evening.
What's your question for the panel? Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, perfect. Okay, what I wanted to know from all of them is why did it take so long for David Lammy to restrict arms to Israel when in April over 600 lawyers signed an open letter, including a Supreme Court judge, saying they believed the UK government were breaking international laws in continuing to supply arms, and also a senior Foreign Office official, Mark Smith, responsible for arms licenses, resigned about 2 weeks ago because his warnings seem to be falling on deaf ears.
Lorna, are you suggesting that this is something that frankly should have been done in the first day or the first week of the new government?
Well, yeah. I mean, this was in April. Over 600 lawyers, many of them High Court judges, felt they had to sign an open letter and make public that they believed strongly that the UK government were breaking international laws. But more importantly, this Foreign Office official felt he had to resign. He was taking a stand.
Understood. Lorna, thanks for the question. Dame Siobhain McDonagh, why did it take so long?
Well, Lorna, I mean, we've only got elected on July 4th, and there's a lot going on, and I'm sure those lawyers meant to do a great thing by signing that letter, but I imagine the Foreign Secretary couldn't agree to limit sales to Israel on the back of a letter, so you'd have to process it. And my understanding, and again, I'm no expert, is that it's a legal process. They have to consider it. The lawyers attached to the Foreign Office have to put their case, and then David Lammy, as the Foreign Secretary, has to make a statement and make a decision. And of the 350 licences that exist, this will close down 30. And rather than it being arms, it's parts of helicopters, of tanks, of stuff like that. So I imagine it's a very fraught issue, as you describe, and that there had to be a balanced and measured view, and sometimes these things do take that length of time.
The question is, isn't it, was it strict legal advice, or was he trying to send a message, or was it a bit of both, or was he using that as an excuse and cover? Because he's now also said, or maybe it's been said, that that could change.
Well, my understanding of what I've read about it is it was a legal decision, but of course every legal decision has an opinion attached to it, and you can get as many views as you can get lawyers, and the whole panel are lawyers. We could get 3 separate views, but it is a measured decision given the fraught nature of the whole issue about Israel and Gaza.
Piers, are you suggesting that you think it was more performative than anything else?
I don't think any issue should be performative in this situation, but I think he needs to be sent a message. You saw Netanyahu today, he gave this press conference, and, he talked about, we sent people SMS messages, and there were this many combatants killed, and we were very good, and we dropped messages. I don't believe a lot of what comes out of his mouth. So I think that we're trying to send a message, and maybe using that as cover, but I think if we're going to send a message.
Meaning?
Maybe that we should be expanding that.
To banning all arms shipments?
I don't.
Would you go all the way?
There's a continuum, isn't there? I don't know. I haven't seen the legal advice. Did he publish it? I'm not sure they did.
Well, that is a question. I was going to answer Ashley Fox. First of all, your reaction to Lorna's question about why this took so long, and secondly, do you want to see the legal advice?
Lorna referred to a letter of 600 lawyers. Actually, as I recall, within a week there was a second letter of another 300-400 lawyers who said this is nonsense. There shouldn't be an arms embargo. And I think if you ask a bunch of lawyers for opinions, you'll get several opinions. I don't think it took particularly long. I mean, David Lammy was only in office for 8 weeks, and he asked for a review of the legal advice. And of course, we haven't seen that. I don't expect the government to publish its legal advice, though ironically, when he was the Shadow Foreign Secretary, he routinely called on the Conservative government to publish it. But I would like him to publish as much information as possible so that we can make a judgment. And it's very difficult not knowing the advice he's received, and presumably there's some intelligence as well saying what the arms were used for, and we don't have sight of that. So it's difficult to form an opinion. I would just say I thought it was poor judgment of the government to make this announcement on the day of the funeral of the executed hostages. I think that was insensitive.
Charlotte Proudman, I know foreign policy is not your area, but there must be all sorts of issues that lawyers and other professional groups think require urgent action. The government surely is facing an array of calls for action on an array of different issues.
No, absolutely. And I think it's also right to say, as we've heard, the importance of transparency. So understanding what legal opinion was given to David Lammy and the consequent action that he took. So as you say, we can all reach our own opinion based on that. At the moment, it seems as if we're very much in the dark, particularly when 2 legal letters were published, reaching, as it seems, very different conclusions. What I will say, though, about Netanyahu is that, well, after seeing the protests just this week in Israel, hundreds of thousands of Israelis that took to the streets to protest Bibi Netanyahu, as they refer to him. I mean, this is a man who is waiting corruption trial himself in Israel, who it seems has lost significant support from his own people, of course, many of whom will have voted for him, many of whom will not have voted for him, and many of whom blame him for what has happened, the consequent war between Israel and Gaza. And also, of course, there's a real critical issue of the fact that him, if you like, he is reliant upon that war continuing to save his own political career. So he has a vested interest and perhaps a conflict of interest with his own people, the people he's supposed to be representing over and above himself.
It did seem, Siobhain McDonagh, as though the announcement by David Lammy, and let me just say that David Lammy is going to be here on LBC talking with Ben Kentish after 10, so we may get more clarity on the reasons that led to this decision. But it did seem to be a decision that didn't please very many people. People either thought it was completely the wrong thing to do and shouldn't have been done in the first place because it was a slap in the face to Britain's traditional ally in Israel, or in large measure, they thought, as Piers Linney suggested, that if you're going to do it and make it real and meaningful.
But don't you think that's because the issue is fraught with conflict? We all have an opinion about the war and what's happening in Gaza and what Israel's rights are. So I think whatever decision you made, you're not going to achieve unanimity because there is so much going on and it is just so complex. But I think that I've read that the suspension of some of these rights to sell parts to military vehicles happened under Mrs. Thatcher and happened under Tony Blair. So it isn't the first time it's happened. It's not a unique judgment to have made.
Is it something that your government should have done?
No, I don't.
Why do you think that? Why do you think not?
Well, presumably, the advice at the time that the Conservative government had showed that the weapons that Israel had were being used in conformity with international law. I think it's very important that there's no equivalence drawn between the actions of Hamas and the actions of the Israeli government, because they're completely different. You know, Hamas set out deliberately to murder innocent civilians. Israel is exercising its right to self-defence and is making efforts to minimise civilian casualties. Now, you can argue as to whether they're making sufficient effort, but these are completely different scenarios. And we should support Israel in its fight against terror.
And on the issue of seeing the legal advice, is it your concern that if you demand the legal advice, you'll then be creating a precedent that could be used against you in the future? What's your...
Well, I don't think we have demanded.
No, but why haven't you?
Because we know it won't be released, because the government never released it.
But you could still demand it.
Well, it would be pointless, wouldn't it? And no person reveals all their legal advice. That's entirely privileged, and it's right that it's...
Simon, would it be OK if I just said to Ashley, the Labour Party is completely unequivocal in accepting that Israel has a right to defend itself, and that, that view in itself has not been uncontroversial, as you know, in the Labour Party, but Keir Starmer has been absolutely unequivocal about it, and his government will always support Israel's right to defend itself.
And on the publication of legal advice, as Ashley Fox says, when they were in government, you constantly demanded it. Are you willing now, do you think, as a government, to publish the legal advice?
As Ashley says, I don't think that's going to happen, no.
But do you think it should?
I'm not a lawyer, unlike everybody else on this panel, and I do understand that lots of people would refuse to give advice if they thought you were going to publish it.
It's a bad precedent. So, legal advice is one thing, isn't it? It's what you do with legal advice that counts, and that can be difficult to explain.
They call it legally privileged documents. So, what happens between you and your lawyer remains confidential and privileged, and whether you take that advice or not is entirely a matter for you. Public don't necessarily.
And there's other contexts which may be sensitive that we're never going to see that can impact that.
OK, I am reminded tonight that my mother always said you should have been a lawyer. We're going to take more of your questions on 0345 6060 973. You can text us at 84850. You can ask Alexa to send a message to LBC, where the time is 8:30 and the news headlines come from Daryl Jackson.
The final report into the Grenfell Tower fire has blamed incompetence, dishonesty and greed for the deaths of 72 people. Chair of the inquiry, Sir Martin Morbick, highlighted decades of failure by governments and the construction industry. At least 4 people have been killed and at least 9 others injured in a shooting at a school in the US state of Georgia. A 14-year-old suspect has been arrested at a high school in Barrow County. 300 people have arrived in the UK following attempts to cross the Channel a day after 12 people died trying to make the journey. A pregnant woman and 6 children are reportedly among those who lost their lives when the boat they were in sank. LBC weather showers for southern areas tonight. Some may be heavy at times with a low of 5 degrees.
This is LBC.
Angela?
On LBC.
And you can call us with your questions for our panel tonight at 0345 6060 973. You can text us at 84850. I'm joined this evening by Dame Siobhain McDonagh, the Labour MP for Mitcham and Morden. Sir Ashley Fox, the Conservative MP for Bridgwater. He led the Conservatives in the European Parliament for 5 years. Piers Linney, the entrepreneur and investor who starred on TV's Dragon's Den. And human rights barrister Dr. Charlotte Proudman, who is the founder of Right to Equality, an organisation seeking to remove sexist inequalities from the law. Let's get to our next question, and it comes from Chris in Cowbridge in South Wales. Good evening, Chris. What's your question for the panel?
Good evening. How are you doing? Good.
Very well, thanks. How are you tonight?
Fabulous. Thank you very much. I was thinking, with the fact that you had such a cross-political section this evening, a question about this wonderful Tory leadership contest might be in order. So considering the Conservative Party got rejected by the British public in the last election, what does this new Tory leader have to do differently?
So Ashley Fox, over to you.
Well, Chris is right. We were rejected by the British people. We need to reflect on that with a little humility. I think the biggest reason why we were rejected was that we were disunited. And for the last 3 years of our government, we spent more time talking about ourselves and infighting than addressing the issues that matter to the British people. So I think the first task of the new leader is to unite our party. and to talk about the issues that matter to people. And that is why I shall be supporting James Cleverly, because I think he can do that. I think he's a man of considerable experience in government. He's been chairman of the party. He led our party as chairman in the 2019 election, which was a great success. And he's also a good media performer. He gets on with people. People like James. And I think he's exactly the right person to come across to address a new generation of voters that haven't thought of voting Conservative.
Tom Tugendhat said the other day, I think a couple of days ago, that the country is no longer taking the Conservative Party seriously. Do you agree with him?
Well, it's normal, I think, after a big election defeat, for the public to forget about the party of opposition, to look at what the government is doing. So I think it's entirely normal that the public aren't very interested in us at the moment. That'll probably go on for a year or two. There will come a moment in this Parliament when people start getting fed up with the Labour Party. And it might happen sooner than Siobhain would wish. And at that point, they will then turn their attention to what the alternative might be. And I think with James Cleverly as our leader, we have the best chance possible of presenting a united and attractive proposition to the British public.
Although we had Tim Farron on the panel last night, who thinks the Liberal Democrats are already proving that they can be the alternative. But Siobhain McDonagh, what advice would you like to give, if any, to the new Conservative leader? What changes should the leader make in order for the party to be an effective opposition?
I'm not sure it's up to me to give advice, but what I would say...
It could be cynical advice. It could be advice designed to undermine them.
Gosh, I think it's important for the Conservative Party to be the best it can be, because governments that don't have strong oppositions can often not do as well as they should. You need to be on your mettle. You need to think there is an opposition. And I think... I would say, as somebody who's dealt with a lot of problems in my own party, I think the Conservative Party have the dilemma of becoming too far to the right, of a small group of people taking it over. And I think William Hague in the Times today had an article about, the things you need to resist. And it's normally the siren calls of dragging yourself to a more extreme position.
But that's an interesting comparison, because there are those that say, well, William Hague was an interesting and an effective leader of his party, but he was, of course, also ultimately a caretaker. You would argue that the Conservatives are picking a caretaker here, or someone who ultimately has the possibility, despite the size of Labour's current majority, truly to challenge the government as an effective opposition in the next election?
Who knows? But I think historically, that person is, whoever wins, is a caretaker who has the job of sorting out the parliamentary party, the Conservative Party in the country, at the same time as trying to provide some leadership. I have every sympathy with the fact that being leader of the opposition is the single worst job in politics.
Piers Linney.
I think you're going to have a caretaker that hopefully can step up to be a leader, and I think you're right. You want to have strong opposition. I probably know more about the US sort of political system, and where it is. But I think with the sort of Conservative Party, is it fundamentally broken already in terms of they're being sort of fractured? You see in the US, I think Trump will lose the election. I can imagine the Republicans are going to fall to pieces as well. So I think to have a strong opposition, absolutely right, I agree with Ashley, it's got to be brought back together. And I don't really see a lot of the candidates as real leaders, and they've all got baggage.
We did think the Republicans were all going to fall apart in 2020.
Let's come back after the election and have that conversation.
OK, I'll be here.
Simon, can I just say...
I'm here for that.
I pray every night that you are right about what the American elections are going to show us, because I think Kamala Harris and Tim Walz will be the best option. But what it worries me is... what if Trump wins?
I think it will. But then what you don't want, just like here, what you don't want is the Democrats have no opposition. You don't want Labour to have not a strong opposition. And I think a lot of these parties that have gone right, they end up fractured in the middle because they can't all go to the right.
Except what I think Trump's been really good at is freezing out any of those mainstream Republicans that we would have recognised as being Republican politicians. But they just seem to be able to... I'm just thinking things I shouldn't say, but, fill their party.
Between us.
Fill their party with people of very extreme
Well, you've got to make sure, actually, that the next election, that, Farage and Reform, in my view, that they're a one-election wonder, a one-cycle wonder.
OK, I did not mean to lead us down Trump, the cul-de-sac of Trump. Charlotte Proudman, what does the new Tory leader have to do?
Well, I just wanted to pick up on the idea of James Cleverly as the Conservative Party leader, the man who made jokes about spiking his wife, you might recall that, with a drug, when also announcing that the Home Office was going to be reforming its policies on the spiking of women. Obviously entirely inappropriate, a terrible gaffe to have made in front of other women, and really showed a lack of insight and understanding into just how violating spiking is, particularly as someone who suffered that. I think he is potentially incompetent to be running for leader of the Conservative Party. And then you look at others such as, Kemi Badenoch. I mean, frankly frightening that we've got to a position where she could be leader of the Conservative Party. Some of the things that she said about women and equalities, particularly about minority people of colour, absolutely reprehensible. And we've spoken about that before on LBC Radio, and it shows, I think, the level of extreme that the Conservative Party has got to. And I'm just deeply concerned, as Piers said, that they're going to try and recruit extremists and those that are very polarised, like Nigel Farage and others, into the party to potentially win votes and win seats. And that's not a country that I certainly want to live in.
And they're already talking about migrants and boats. That seems to be what they're using.
Well, then on the other hand, the boat policy, the small boats, stop the small boats, which is, I just thought, so embarrassing of the government. This huge, powerful entity, the state, saying, stop the small boats. I mean, and it clearly didn't work, and they didn't stop the boats, and then Rwanda was a complete failure. I think the public saw straight through that and have had enough of that type of hyperbole.
I want to give Ashley Fox a chance to come in here.
It's astonishing and patronising of Charlotte to say that Kemi's views are reprehensible. I mean, Kemi is a black woman who's capable of forming her own opinions, and they don't need to conform to what Guardian readers might approve of. And it's just astonishing. Her views are reprehensible. I mean, who are you to judge whether her views are right or wrong? She's entitled to form those views. OK, they don't agree. You don't agree with them, but they don't conform to what you think a black woman should think. That's the problem.
It's nothing to do with her being nothing to do with her being a black woman. It's to do with her being an individual in a very powerful position. And yes,
and
Ashley, in my view, many of her opinions are reprehensible, and I absolutely stand by that. And I think that she should not be in that position. It's a very privileged position. And I think we need somebody that can actually bring the country together rather than dividing it.
I think she's a very powerful politician. I like her very much. I just happen to think that James is the person best placed to unify our party.
All right, let's get to our next question. It's come in on WhatsApp from Nikki, who says, we're constantly told the country has no money. Can the panel tell us how much Brexit has damaged the country economically and contributed to the UK's threadbare state? Piers Linney.
Oh.
Nice, easy one.
You need a longer show. I don't know what the exact number is, but it's 4-5% of GDP. I've got businesses that we're exporting. It's an utter nightmare. The amount of money, energy, time that goes into red tape. I've got businesses where we're trying to recruit people. It's very, very difficult. So talking about the point system and limiting, legal sort of immigration it's insane. We need more skilled people in this country. So Brexit has been an absolute mitigated disaster for this country. However, being an entrepreneur, you are where you are. You just get on with it. We're not going to go backwards. So the question for this country is how do we now set ourselves up in this moment we have to remain relevant in the sort of global markets, global economy, and that's through technology, increasing productivity, making sure we have the right skills, because the world's about to change, and they always say the ship's leaving the harbour, and we need to make sure on it. When I spend all my days worrying about artificial intelligence, right, this is going to change everything we do, and it's also a potential panacea to our productivity issue, but we've got to grasp it and run with it, otherwise we will become insignificant.
Siobhain McDonagh?
I think Brexit's happened, people voted for it, we had a big conversation about it, and now the government's got to grapple with doing what it can, knowing that.
But how much do you think, the question that Nick is asking is really, how much do you think it's contributed to what your government claims is a £22 billion hole in the public finances?
Well, it certainly affected our ability to trade with our nearest and the richest trading group in the world. So clearly that has an enormous knock-on. I mean...
GDP generates tax receipts.
I mean, we are luckier in that we mainly do services in this country, don't we? So whether it's legal, whether it's AI, whether it's hospitality, whatever it is, but it's had a huge impact.
Ashley Fox, huge impact economically of Brexit?
I think probably far less difference than people ever imagined. I mean, there are some benefits of Brexit, there are some costs.
Name them.
What is... So I would say one of the greatest benefits is the ability to tailor laws to suit our economy. And you referred to AI and how important that is going to be. Now, the European Union at this moment is in the process of putting together laws on AI, which will be slow and cumbersome and expensive. And there is an opportunity for the United Kingdom to draft something that is less cumbersome, less costly, and to allow those companies to innovate in the UK.
I agree with you. So Meta's stalled launch of products because of the EU regulation. We've got a chance to look at what they've done, what doesn't work, and fix it. So that's the benefit. It still doesn't change the fact that we're in a hole. It's a question of how do we get out of it.
And one of the areas that I'm very passionate about are drug trials. Because my sister died of a brain tumour last year, and so I do a lot of campaigning for rare cancers to get a look in with the pharmaceutical companies. And Brexit just destroyed our ability to do lots of drug trials, which is an area could be potentially, with our fantastic scientists, could be a basis for economic growth from which we'd all benefit, quite apart from the research itself. And when we were no longer part of the European medicines body, we lost so many scientists.
If I could just ask you, though, is that there is an opportunity. If we're going to really grasp this opportunity to be an independent nation, let's use it and run with it, rather than still trying to play keeping up with everybody else. It doesn't make any sense.
Charlotte Proudman. Aside from AI, I'm struggling to see what laws have been positively changed as a result of Brexit that couldn't have been done before that, which have justified us leaving the European Union. And going back to. Well, you've just said yourself that immigration hasn't reduced under the Conservative Party, so under the Conservative government. So what has changed?
So we've introduced a points-based system, which means that in order to get a work visa, you have to meet a certain number of points.
I understand what the points-based system is, but how have you reduced immigration?
The difficulty was that system came into being during the middle of COVID. So clearly, for the first year, there was very little immigration. This is 2021. And immediately after 22-23, it rocketed. Now, I'm the first to admit that we set those points too low. We made a mistake. But in principle now, we can change the points required, and by doing so, we can adjust the number of visas granted and the number of people that have permission to come into our country. So we have now got control of legal immigration, because we decide who...
But you haven't, and you didn't. You had 2 years to do that, and you didn't do it.
We did have control. We didn't exercise sufficient control because we set the points too high. That was a mistake. But it doesn't...
I mean, you didn't reduce immigration, and yet your own government pledged to do that, and you failed to do it. And you've only given one example out of an array of others that apparently your government was going to drastically reform and overhaul the legal system to the extent that was required and could only possibly be done, apparently, under Brexit. They were false promises. And we go back to what we were saying earlier about the polarisation of our society. Brexit is the perfect example of that. It encapsulates the fear-mongering that was used in order to get people to vote to leave the EU. I mean, the red buses and whipping up this moral panic and fear of migrants coming in and taking people's jobs. failing to recognise the contribution that very many of those people that have come from Europe have actually made to the economy. And then don't even get me started as well on customs tax.
Let me give Ashley a chance to respond.
When you try and refund things...
Let me give Ashley a chance to respond, because I've got to get to a break. Ashley, a brief response.
I'm just going to say the Remain campaign was absolutely disgraceful as well. You talked about fear-mongering. We had George Osborne and David Cameron saying the economy would collapse if there was Brexit.
They were right.
No, but his point obviously has not collapsed.
Inflation,
you're talking complete nonsense.
And that's not true at all. Inflation was sky high.
Caused by COVID and the Russian invasion of Ukraine.
There are a number of variables, and you know that. And one of them was Brexit. People, as a result of your government under Liz Truss, were turfed out of their homes because they couldn't afford the mortgage.
OK, stunningly, we are not going to agree on Brexit. We're going to take more of your questions that are stacking up in the switchboard and on the texts for our panel here on Cross Question. But right now, the time on LBC is 10 to 9.
Tom Swarbrick, Monday to Friday from 4 p.m.
Look at the problem we've got. Look at the issue that there now is. And here we have another knife crime incident, an 11-year-old girl, and they've been stabbed.
Listen on your radio and Global Player, LBC. Cross Question on LBC. Call 0345 6060 973.
And joining me around the table, Dame Siobhain McDonagh, the Labour MP for Mitcham and Morden, Sir Ashley Fox, the Conservative MP for Bridgwater, Piers Linney, the entrepreneur and investor who you might know from TV's Dragon's Den, and Dr. Charlotte Proudman, a human rights barrister and the founder of Right to Equality. And our next question is on text. It comes from Joe. He says, austerity-loving Starmer, which is the giveaway, defended his decision to cut winter fuel allowance at Prime Minister's Questions today. Shouldn't his government think again on this? Shouldn't you, Dame Siobhain McDonagh?
Well, the truth is we don't quite know how bad things are at the moment and what decisions the government will have to make in the budget. So I think the problem with the winter fuel allowance, it's a hard decision, and it was one taken in isolation. So we can't have a look at what the other options may have been. It also relates to one of the worst taken up benefits there is, pension credit. There's about 880,000 people who don't claim it. And so now we're going to have to look at trying to encourage people to do that, which is not an easy task. It's tough, but we know where we go if we don't make the correct decisions on the economy. We go to Liz Truss making spending commitments and not being able to meet them.
So no regrets on your part?
Always a regret, because who would want to do that?
But no regrets that are sufficient to make you think that the government should think again?
Well, I think we've got to see what else is going to happen in the budget. You know, I fear there may be even tougher decisions out there.
October will soon be upon us. Sir Ashley Fox.
It's a disgraceful decision to cut the winter fuel payment, particularly given for the 2 years before that, the Labour Party sort of said in the Commons, oh, is the government going to cut this? We won't, all the rest. There's all the rhetoric before the election. This is a political decision by Keir Starmer. he and his Chancellor have decided to give a 15% pay rise to train drivers already earning £60,000 a year. They're going to take £300 away from pensioners on £13,000. And my concern is for those pensioners that earn just above the pension credit limit. So by all means, have a campaign. Encourage the very poorest pensioners to claim pension credit, but there'll be many that don't. There'll be many just above that limit, and this is a political choice. And there were other economies to be made. There's an enormous budget for the DWP. What other savings were considered? I asked the Chancellor that question. I didn't get a reply. Political choice to pay money to train drivers and other high-paid public sector workers and take it from pensioners.
Piers Linney.
I think this is one of those costs, let's call it that, that's been around for a long time, and no one's been prepared to deal with it. I think the question, I don't think anyone's got a problem with people that can afford it not having this sort of support. The question is, where do you draw the line? And I think that's what may need to be looked at. But I think overall, I don't think anyone's got a problem with it.
And Charlotte Proudman.
I think it's very difficult. I think that the government's in an invidious position where, as you say, you've got a 22 billion black hole. And what are they going to do about that? I mean, inevitably there's going to have to be cuts, and I suppose to an extent there is going to be a level of austerity. I do think it's right, though, that the pay for public sector train drivers and others is going to go up. I think that was the right decision. As for pensioners, of course, I'm unfortunately not in the position that Keir Starmer is, but he's going to have to make very difficult decisions.
Let's get to our next question, which comes from Stacey. It's a yes or no question. You can have a little bit more than yes or no, but not much. Should the government nationalise Ticketmaster? Piers Linney.
No, it'd be a disaster. But what they should think about is regulating or stopping this dynamic pricing. People talk about it. What I'd like to know is, where's that additional super profit? Where's it gone? That's what we should be looking at. But, if you went into your supermarket to buy a banana and there was one left, it was 300 quid, you'd be very upset. That's essentially what they're doing. But
we had a guest on the other night who was defending dynamic ticket pricing and saying it was just supply and demand. Pure capitalism.
I agree. And Uber companies, taxi companies do this kind of thing based on traffic. But I think there's a principle, it's basic contract law, isn't it? You expect a price, and suddenly you turn up and it's doubled. I think it's and they're talking about it in football now as well. So it's something that needs to be looked at, and I think it should be regulated.
Siobhain McDonagh, do you fancy owning Ticketmaster as a government?
Absolutely not, no. I don't want to be responsible for
people's Oasis tickets.
For Oasis tickets, no. Can you imagine the computer system would crash pretty early, wouldn't it?
Ashley Fox. I'm guessing the answers are no.
No, and I wouldn't regulate ticket prices either.
Well, you wouldn't do anything about dynamic pricing?
Nothing at all. The government does too much as it is. It does too much badly. The government should do less and better, and we shouldn't meddle in things like tickets.
Even if someone's paying, potentially £600, £1,000, whatever the Oasis tickets end up going for.
Don't buy the Oasis ticket.
Charlotte Proudman.
I don't think there's anything inherently wrong or problematic with regulation. Had they have better regulated buildings and cladding, then perhaps Grenfell wouldn't have happened. But, going back to Ticketmaster, I think part of the problem is a monopoly. They have a monopoly on selling those tickets, so there isn't any other competition, potentially from another supplier that could sell those tickets. And then you could have competition in terms of, well, who are you going to queue up with to buy your tickets, Ticketmaster or another entity? And I'd like to see some more competition and regulation in the market.
And Simon, I realise we're having a bit of a laugh about all this, but people do have the right to access some cultural things that we all share, a love of music, certain bands. So I appreciate that music has changed, and so now artists make much more out of their concerts than they do their recording. But there's got to be a bit of being reasonable about this.
Do you really need the government to...
What about the football? Yeah. What about the football? If dynamic pricing comes to football, there'll be uproar, won't there?
But that's up to the clubs to charge what they wish, and if fans want to pay it, they can. I mean, we get into this mindset that because there's something we don't like, therefore the government should intervene and do something about it. No, it's not the government's business to get involved in every nook and cranny of life.
But how awful would it be if people could not access the country's game? Because of just how high the top clubs...
Is it the banana in the supermarket? Is it the last loaf of bread?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's how important is music and culture and diversity.
I'm
inclusion.
sensing an entire other hour of the programme for next week. Let's finish with our fun question of the night, which has been sent in by Alfie. A man who had been a chief engineer at a South African rail company has been sentenced to 15 years in prison for lying on his CV and claiming that he had engineering qualifications. So, Piers Linney, what job would you like to give a go without prior experience?
You're asking the wrong person because I'm an entrepreneur. I've done that on a daily basis. Astronaut. I'm going back to my childhood.
Astronaut?
I'm involved in space, so that'd be the one. I just pull a few levers, press a few buttons.
Well, William Shatner did it. I mean, I think that's fantastic. Siobhain McDonagh.
Oh, I'd love to be in a rock band, but I'm not sure that I'd ever make it.
No qualifications?
No qualifications whatsoever. Not ability to sing either.
Ashley Fox.
Oh, I think a wine merchant. I would just love
Oh, you could do that.
I would love to go around the world.
I like that.
Tasting wine. I have no great judgment or skill in this, but I know what I like, and I would bring back what I like to this country.
That sounds fun, I have to say. Probably a pilot. It's a bit dicey with life and death there.
Well, I know the feeling. The job I would like to give a go without prior experience is hosting Cross Question on LBC. My thanks tonight to Dame Siobhain McDonagh, the Labour MP for Mitcham and Morden, Sir Ashley Fox, the Conservative MP for Bridgwater, Piers Linney, the entrepreneur and investor from TV's Dragon's Den, and Dr. Charlotte Proudman, human rights barrister. We will have another edition of Cross Question next Monday. It's every Monday, Tuesday and Wednesday at 8 p.m. Into our final hour of the evening we go tonight, and we're going to switch gears as you put the kids to bed and are still getting everybody ready for the school run. It turns out a growing number of you are now homeschooling your children. Have you ever considered giving up the school run and keeping them at home for school instead? There are now more than 90,000 children being homeschooled across the UK. The number is rising year after year. One survey suggests a quarter of families are considering it. Are you already homeschooling your kids? How and why did you decide to do it? If you are a child being homeschooled, what's it like? Are you able to establish friendships under the same circumstances that you would if you were in a traditional school? And if you're thinking about it, share your list of pros and cons.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 9 o'clock, the Foreign Secretary has told LBC the wait for justice goes on for survivors and bereaved families of the Grenfell Tower fire. A damning report into the disaster has found decades of failure turn the block into a death trap.